Welcome to toy-polloi. Parental guidance. This video contains scenes of Lego destruction.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be looking at more restorations of these vintage Kenner Real Ghostbusters figures. Now, in a recent video I've shown you how to restore the tie on the Fright Features Egon, but another one that I'm getting asked for all the time, and something that a good friend of mine, Jeremy from the channel Tokyo Toy, asked me to do about 5 years ago, is how to fix the Proton packs that come with the basic figures. Now, these seem to be a very sort of easily broken part, and it's something that I've been pondering for a long time as to how I can actually go about and fix them, and that's what we're going to cover today, because as you can see here I have a few different Proton packs that are broken, and I think all of the sort of common areas of these should be able to be fixed. The main one seems to be the actual sort of Proton blaster has two little sort of loops on it, and because of the type of plastic that this is made of, those tend to snap, and you can see that this one has both of those snapped off. And also the way the pack attaches to the back of the figure, it's done with a small plastic clip, and you can see that those tend to break as well. So those are going to be the main areas that I want to show how to fix, and there might be some other areas I will cover if this video doesn't drag on too long, but certainly those are the ones that I want to get sorted today so that these figures can carry their Proton packs again. Now, as you can see, I have a few figures here, and I have actually picked up some of the new sort of Hasbro reissues of the figures, because I actually wanted to have a look at the packs that were on those, because I've heard from some people that they've actually sort of modified the figures a bit and changed the way they attach the figures, and I thought it would be interesting to just to see if there's anything that we can take from those and sort of add to these old ones. I have a feeling there won't be, just because of the sort of way these things are made, but it's always good to sort of see what has been changed, especially when it's the toy company doing it themselves. So as you can see, I have two figures there which I'm going to open in a minute, and we can take a look at the back of those. Okay, so I've just opened up the new reissue of Ray so we can take a look at what they've changed on it. This is the original figure on the left, and you can see there's quite a large hole on the back there with some little sort of gripping clip parts in it, and that's what the backpack clips into. I'll get an original backpack here, so you can see here it has these little sort of clip sections, and those clip into those quite nicely. It's fairly sort of firmly held in place, and then to pull it out it relies on those two pieces sort of squeezing together a bit so that you can remove it. On the new one, they've actually sort of modified it, so it's now just a sort of hexagon shaped hole, and the new backpacks no longer have the clip on them. They've just got a post here, and that post slots into there quite firmly again, but that actually holds pretty nicely. And I'm going to say that there's less to break on this new modern version, but I have a feeling that won't actually fit in the old version. No, it won't. It's too loose. So yeah, they certainly designed it so that these backpacks won't work with the old versions of the figures, but I think the design is actually slightly better. It's certainly not going to break on these new ones. Let's bring in one of the other figures, because you can see this actually has a slightly different attachment on the back. It no longer has the clips, it's just got a sort of angled hole. We can drop that in, and it sort of holds on, but really very loosely. So yeah, that's an interesting sort of change they've made there. As for the front part of the gun, I don't think they've actually changed anything at all. Maybe they've made the plastic a little bit thicker. Yeah, I can see they've made the sort of the plastic thicker, because on these old ones this plastic is quite thin, and also with age gets quite brittle, and I think that's why it breaks. So they've thickened up these little attachment points so that they are, you know, that original one looks, maybe it's about 1 millimetre. These maybe look like they're about 1.5 millimetres. So only a slightly bit thicker, but that will be enough to make them that much sturdier. So I think I may take some of that when I come to rebuild these. But yeah, interesting. Anyway, it's interesting that they have made these changes to make these backpacks that little bit sturdier. But now we've got to go back to this old one and try and fix it up. So the first thing we're going to fix is this little attachment post, the bit that goes into the back of the figure. You can see this one has snapped, or at least one side of it is snapped off, so it no longer holds in place. It's really very loose on both of these figures with both the sort of different types of attachments. This one is slightly better. It does sort of hold on, but as you can see, any sort of movement and it will fall off. We need to find a way of replacing this broken little hook part. I was looking in my Lego pot just to see if I had something that might do the job, and I found these, and initially they don't look that sort of promising, but it turns out they are incredibly useful, and also just a perfect fit. If we slot this into the back of Ray, you can see that fits really quite perfectly. It has the same sort of taper that this hole has. I'll put the number here for the Lego piece. Every single bit of Lego has a number, and with that you can then search for it on eBay or somewhere. But that just happens to fit really quite nicely. It also fits on this figure. Now it is loose. You can see that it does come out with a little bit of sort of help, but I think we can modify that. And also with Lego, everything is available in sort of lots of different parts. So I had a quick search online and I managed to buy these. I've got some blue ones and I've got some purple ones, and the purple ones match the colour, not exactly, but that is a pretty close match. And obviously there is also a blue backpack. Let me bring that in, so you can get the blue version as well. So if I get the blue version there, that is a pretty good match, and that's what we're going to use now to make this new clip. Now, as I showed, this Lego piece doesn't fit quite sort of snugly enough. It does fit in, but you can see with these purple ones especially that it tends to slide out. But that is very easy to fix, and all you need to do is put 2 tiny little drops of super glue on either side, let it harden, so leave it for a few hours, and that makes this piece that slightly bit larger. And I've already got one prepped just because it takes time for the super glue to dry. So you can see here we have that same Lego piece just with 2 little drops of super glue on either side. And now if I put that into the back of this Peter figure, you can see that holds in place really quite firmly, and you can still remove it, but it just has that extra little bit of grip, and that's all we need. So what we're going to do is attach this to the broken backpack, and as luck would have it, it looks like the hole here is about the same diameter as the little peg on the back of the backpack. So all I need to do is sort of work out how deep I want this to go into the back of the figure. Now these do sit quite flush, and let me just put this peg in here just to see how far that goes in. That is not too bad either. So I think what we can do is we'll chop off most of this post. Yeah, almost all of that post, and then we can stick that on with a bit of super glue again, and I think that will work. So I've got some plastic nippers here. I'm just going to carefully chop off most of the post. Just do it like that. It's nice soft plastic, so it's easy to cut. We'll get the Lego piece. We can push that on there. Almost feels like it doesn't need any glue at all, but I will be gluing this just to make sure it sort of is nice and sturdy. Let's try that on the figure and see what happens. Well, it's in place. It's a little bit loose still. I think we maybe need to make some more modifications, but that's not bad at all. That's certainly going to work. I think what I'm going to do is, you can see there's 2 little support sort of bits either side of this post. I'm going to trim those down so that this sits a little bit further on, and then we can glue that in place. And we'll make a couple of little more modifications to it, but I think that is going to work very nicely indeed. Okay, well I've now made a few more little modifications. I've cut slightly more of that peg away because it was just a bit too long, and I've also cut 2 notches on either side of this Lego piece. So you can see there's now a little groove all the way through. Maybe you can see it better without my hand in the way. And that now fits a lot nicer onto this backpack. I've also put a little bit more super glue on each side just to those little pips there to make them slightly more raised, and I think that will do the job. I've now got to glue it in place onto there. There are 2 types of plastic used on this Proton pack. This is a much softer plastic, and the plastic used on the gun part of it is a much harder plastic, so we're going to have to use 2 different types of glue. For this one we can use plastic weld, but for this softer stuff we are just going to be using super glue. And I've got my Gorilla Glue here, so I'm going to put a very tiny amount just around the edge of this. We don't need a great deal, just a little bit sort of around the edge should be enough. And then that will glue in place quite nicely, and once that's dried we can test it on the figure. I'm just going to move the glue around a bit so it's sort of all over everywhere, and then we'll push that in place and let that set. Then we can test it on the back of Peter in a few minutes time. Okay, that super glue has had time to set, and that's gone off quite nice and firmly. I don't think there's going to be any problems with that. We can now test this in the back of Peter and see how it works. Yep, perfect. That is really very well held in place. That's not going anywhere, and we can easily remove it as well. So I think that is going to be my solution for this. You can see here that the super glue that I put on hasn't had quite time to dry. It's just a little bit soft, so really I should have left that a bit longer, but for the purposes of filming you sometimes got to rush these things, but I think that will do. Yeah, that's a very nice job, and that backpack is nice and firmly held in place. Now let's move on to the actual Proton blaster, and we'll get that fixed up. The actual Proton blaster is going to be a little bit more of a tricky job, and we're going to have to make some stuff from scratch for this, because I can't see any other way of doing it. You can see here, this is the unbroken one from the new pack, and the broken one that I have, so there's a bit missing on the top of this sort of front fixing point. Basically that top panel has snapped away. That will be fairly straightforward to replace. And in the back one, you can see we're missing the top half of it, and I think really on that one we're going to have to cut away all of the bottom part of it, and we'll just make this whole thing from scratch. Let's start with the front part, because I think that will be the easiest. We're going to be making this out of 1mm styrene sheet. Now this is stuff you can pick up from most model shops, so you can see it's a 1mm thick sheet. It's very easy to cut. It's also very easy to glue, especially with the plastic used on here, which works well with plastic weld. The styrene sheet also works well with plastic weld. So the first thing we're going to do is make this missing piece here, and to do that I just need a ruler. I'm going to measure the two sort of bits that I need to measure. So we need to measure across, which is exactly 1 centimetre, so 10mm, and we're going to measure across the end there, and that is 3mm. So I'm going to cut myself a small bit of styrene, which is 10mm by 3mm, and we'll stick that on, and then I'm going to double that up. So I'm going to also cut a piece that is the width of the inner distance there, which if we measure that, just so I can cut it at the same time, that is 8mm. So we need another piece that's 8mm by 3mm. So we sort of building it up. So we have one piece on the top there, and then we put another piece inside just to give that an extra bit of thickness. So let's do that piece first. As you can see, this stuff is incredibly easy to cut. So I now have my two pieces. So that is a 10mm by 3mm piece and an 8mm by 3mm piece. And I'm just going to stick these two together. This is using plastic weld, which again I've shown many times on this channel. Very useful stuff for modelling. I'm going to put a bit of the plastic weld on the larger piece, and I'm going to drop the smaller piece onto it. I'll just sort of line those two up. What you're looking for is a shape a little bit like that, if I can get the camera to focus. So we've got a sort of double thickness in the middle, but with two sort of little notches on either end, and that's what we're going to attach to the top of that sort of broken piece. That has now had a few minutes to dry, and we can do a little test fit. So you can see that is the piece I've just made, and that should fit just between those two remaining prongs that are left on the blaster. I think that's going to work quite nicely. So again, we're going to plastic weld this in place. Don't worry if it's sort of a bit rough at the moment. We can sort of file this down once it's done. And obviously it is the wrong colour plastic, but we are going to be painting this to match at the end. And as we've got to replace this entire part as well, we'll have a white piece here. But what we're wanting at the moment is a nice strong structure. And I think that is going to do the job quite nicely. It's a very simple thing to make, but it's going to work very well. So yeah, let's get this all plastic welded in place. I'm just going to leave that in position. I'll open the plastic weld. Again, get a small amount on the brush. And I'm just going to brush that in, and it should get sort of pulled into the joint. Like so. You can already feel that that's actually sticking, and I'll just put a little bit sort of more inside, and we'll let that dry, and then we can sort of give it a little bit of a file down and a tidy up, but that should hold very nicely. That's now had time to set, so I've got a small file here. This is just a nail file, the sort of thing that you would file your nails with, but it's very good just for sort of softening off the edges of these bits of styrene. And they're very cheap, so you can sort of buy a pack of them and use them until they've worn out and chuck them away. So I'd always recommend having some of these in your sort of toolbox. Just want to soften the edges so that it's no sort of sharp corners, because the original toy doesn't really have any sharp corners. I'm yeah, very happy with that. That's going to do the job nicely. By the time that's painted, I don't think you'll even notice that that has been replaced. We can now move on to the rear sort of clip. I think that's going to be a little bit more work, but again, now that we've done that, I think that's going to be possible. With this rear clip, we are going to have to make the whole thing from scratch. These broken pieces are of no use. I think we're just going to cut those away. So I've got plastic nippers here, and I'm just going to go for this. I'm going to chop that right off so that we've got a nice flat surface to work with. As you can see, the plastic is really brittle. I'm not quite sure what happens to this plastic over the years, but it gets very sort of weak and is easy to break. And I have a feeling that's why these sort of snap as they do. We are going to cut off the other side as well. We want this nice and flat. So let's try and get that done. Yeah, not too bad. Anything that's not quite level, just trim up with a knife. But the plastic nippers should sort of get you most of the way there. I can actually see that there's a slightly sort of thicker area on this right hand side. On the left hand side you can see it's sort of all 1mm thick, and on the right hand side there's a little bulge there. I actually need to cut that away for my plan to work, because what I want to do is remake this again out of the 1mm styrene. So we're going to make a 1mm thick sort of either side. We'll do the same thing that I did at the top there, so we'll sort of double it up and get a sort of a 2mm thick piece in the end. We actually need to attach these side panels to the gun in some way, and to do that I'm actually going to insert a couple of new pieces of plastic in there, and you want a nice flat surface for those to stick onto. So I'm just going to trim away this small piece of plastic. Again, it should be quite easy to do just with a knife, just so that we get a nice flat surface. Yeah, that's better. Just so that there's a flat surface in there. So now we need to make this part, and again it's just a case of measuring it. So I've got my ruler here. We can see that that is just slightly over 5mm wide at the bottom and 3mm wide at the top, and then its length is, I'm going to say 10mm, because we need there's going to be 1mm of extra material at the top when we put the top panel on. So I need to cut something that's 10mm tall, 3mm across at the top and 5mm across at the bottom. We need two of those, and I'm going to cut the same panels as well for the top, which on this one that is 11mm wide. So we need one piece that is 11mm wide by 3mm, and then a piece that is 9mm wide by 3mm to go inside. So I'm going to cut all of those, and then we can start constructing this missing loop. I've now got all the bits cut, and I've actually started sticking some pieces together. So you can see I've made the same sort of top piece that we made for the front little loop. And these angled sections we are going to stick like so. So we're going to stick one on that side, and we'll do the same, we'll stick another one on that side. And then you can see I've also cut off these other little pieces of styrene, and I'm just going to stick those at the sort of the thick bottom part of the angled piece. We will trim them to size at the end, but I'm going to stick those like that, so when we come to attach this to the gun, we can sort of slot those in there. That's why I'm making them a bit too long, so I can then sort of work out how much I can fit in once everything is made. But really the next stage is just to stick these 5 pieces together and let it dry. once everything is dry, I've ended up with this little shape here, which looks like a very good match for the missing loop. As you can see, I've now trimmed down these bottom sort of bits that we stuck on, and these are the bits that are going to be hidden inside, but the overall shape is looking correct. It still needs some fine tuning, it needs a bit of sanding down, and I'll do that once everything has been plastic welded in place and it's all dried nice and firmly, because at the moment obviously this is a little bit sort of weak at the bottom. You can easily squeeze out and it might break the top pieces, but once everything's glued in place then we should be good to go. So I'm now going to stick this in here. We can just do a quick test fit so you can see what I'm doing. There you go, it matches quite nicely. So again, get the plastic weld out. I'm going to do one side at a time, and I'm going to use my tweezers to sort of push everything in place and make sure that it is stuck where I want it to go, because this is not the easiest of things to do. So I'm going to get a lot of plastic weld on one side, and I'm going to drop that in and sort of line it up. Use these tweezers here to push the two surfaces inside together. I don't think that's looking too bad at all. And then we'll turn it around, and for this side I'm just going to have to sort of let capillary action take place, and I will hope that this sort of falls into the join. And then I can just push this together on that side. That looks like that has worked. Yeah, that's doing quite nicely. So I'll just put a little bit more around the edges of that. I'll let it dry for probably about half an hour, make sure everything is sort of firmly stuck, and then I'm going to get the files out and I'll just file it down and smooth off all the edges. I think that is really going to do the job very nicely. Everything has now had time to dry, and I've given it a little bit of a sand and a shape just to sort of fine tune everything. You can see that's what we're left with. It's starting to look really very sort of nice. It's going to do the job quite well. Obviously there is another feature of these two handles, is that they hook onto these two clips on the side of the Proton pack, and I have to say it's not perfect, but it does actually hold in place. You can see that will work quite well. So not only will this hold onto the character's hand, let's bring in Peter so we can hook that on there. You can see that's working very nicely. It does hook onto the backpack. I've also done another one that I had here, which was this Proton pack, and you can see on this one that both of the handles were missing. So not only have I remade this rear handle, I've made the front one from scratch in exactly the same way, so it's just a little bit smaller, and you can see that does work as well. And again, even though these are completely made from scratch, it does actually hook onto the backpack, so it's quite a sort of nice little thing to be able to make. It's not the easiest of things, but it certainly is possible. Now all we've got to do is give these a coat of paint and try and make them match the plastic colour so that no one will notice that they've been fixed. For painting these, I'm just going to be using some acrylic paints. These are Vallejo model colours. I've just had a look in my pot of paints just to see what sort of colours I've got, and I've got a purple. This one is called Violet Red, which is number 70.812, which seems to be quite a good match for the purple Proton pack. This is slightly yellowed with age, so it's actually not too bad a colour match. For the blue, again, I've got some Vallejo model colours. This one is just called Blue, 70.95. That's a little bit too dark, so I'm going to mix that with some of this flat blue, which is 70.962, and I think I'll be able to get something that's close. It doesn't matter if it's slightly off, I just want to sort of hide these as best I can. So I think we'll start with the purple, because this one looks like the closest match. It's actually not bad at all. It's they always dry a little bit lighter, and this is going to need a couple of coats anyway, just because it's painting directly onto a white plastic. But actually, I think that's quite a sort of a good match for a paint straight out of the bottle. Normally you have to mix these. Yeah, I'm thinking that's pretty good. Also need to paint the inside, even though you can't particularly see it. I will paint that as well. And yeah, this is definitely going to need a second coat. You can see the white through it, but on first coat, that's pretty nice. So I'll get that painted. We'll do the blue as well. Let everything dry, and then we'll put a clear top coat on it as well, just to give it some extra protection. But let's get these all painted up first. These have now had a second coat, and I was actually able to do a bit more sort of colour matching on this one. I put a little bit of white in with the purple, and as you can see, that's not too bad. It's still a little bit dark, but I'm very happy with how that looks, and it's certainly fitting nice and steady and really does look the part now. I don't think many people would even notice that had been repaired. The blue one is actually a better colour match. You can see that paint just happened to be that little bit nearer the shade of blue that was originally used. Again, that's looking really very nice. So let's get these onto the figures and see what they look like. And here they are. Both figures are now able to hold their proton blasters, and the pack also stays in place. So you can see all of those fixes have worked really quite nicely. Now, this is not the easiest of fix to do. I understand that there's quite a lot of sort of careful bits of modelling and gluing, but it's certainly worthwhile doing because there are so many of these proton packs around that have both of these areas broken. And as you can see, with a little bit of time and effort, I've managed to get two very broken proton packs back on the figures and in a very displayable state. Now, there are some other areas I'd like to cover on these proton packs, mainly sort of the broken proton streams. You can see here I have one that's sort of loose from a proton pack, and I will come back to that and cover it in future videos. I just need to track down some more broken proton packs, so if you have any, drop me a line and I'll see what we can sort out, because it's certainly fun to be fixing these toys. It's not a toy line that I'd really bothered collecting as a child, but they are actually very nice to play with and very nice to work on. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.